Hey everyone, it's Blue here at Blue Bears Games, and today's video continues my several weeks long adventure of showing you my personal decks that I play with that are also part of the 32 deck challenge that I decided to take part in. I explained what the 32 deck challenge was last week in my good card video, so if you don't know what it is, you can check out the explanation there, or this graphic should kind of explain it a little as well. After this video is done, I will be able to check off the Bant box, as the deck I'm about to show you has Chulane, Teller of Tales as the commander. I started building this deck in January of 2021, and just like the card deck, it was put on the back burner when the budget decks that I make and sell started taking off, and I just didn't have enough time to finish it. Now that I have caught up a little bit, I was able to add the last few cards to call this a complete deck. Eventually, there will be an update video for this deck since there has been so much new stuff added in the last 2.5 years that I know it is going to be needed. If you don't know what Chulane does, let me tell you all about her. She costs one of each of blue, white, and green, plus 2 generic mana, or 5 total mana, to cast for a 2/4 legendary human druid with 3 good abilities. The first ability is Vigilance, which is nice, but not really relevant to the build. The second is that whenever you cast a creature spell, and it's cast not when it comes into play, you draw a card, and then you may put a land card from your hand directly onto the battlefield. This does not count as your one land that you can play for the turn, which is quite relevant to the build I chose to go with. The third and last ability is that you can pay 3 generic mana and tap her to return target creature you control to its owner's hand, which again is relevant to the build I chose to make. I went with Chulane for the Bant color commander because I really like the type of advantages that she can give you for the format. Card draw and ramp are some of the more powerful effects in general, and she provides both in one card. I chose to go with a bounce theme that is reminiscent of a flicker deck since it's a fun way to play for me personally. Some folks may not like having to keep track of all the triggers, but I enjoy it. Now let me show you how I built the rest of the 99 so you can see just what I'm talking about. As I like to do, I'll start with the lands and go from there. So before I get into the lands that I like to start with, I wanted to show you what I chose as far as my protection for the deck, which was the light or sky blue Dragon Shield sleeves, because they look pretty nice and they fit the color scheme. And the box I used is an Ultimate Guard Sidewinder that also was light blue. I thought it was pretty nice for the combination of colors for the deck. As far as the lands go, I'll start off with basically the mana fixing of the deck. It's mostly mana fixing like most of my decks are, and 1 or 2 utility cards. So Command Tower is a must in a 3-color deck. As far as Headquarters, I added to the deck right before the video because I had it, and I had already made this deck a while ago, and I changed some of the lands out before this, but there will be changes coming again later. Seaside Citadel adds the 3 colors, enters play tapped. I mean, it's just as good as far as Headquarters, except for it doesn't have any land types, which is big, and it doesn't cycle if I don't need it. Trevor's Ruins, I liked the Lair lands from Planeshift, is what this set is. The Lair cards are tri-lands that can come into play untapped. So it's a lair in addition to its type, and then when it comes into play, you have to sacrifice it unless you return a non-lair card you control to your hand. Most of the lands, actually all the lands in this deck are non-lair except for the Trevor's Ruins. So I liked the lair cards, especially for Commander with tri-color decks. I've got the 3 shock lands for the color schemes. So Breeding Pool, Hallowed Fountain, and Temple Garden are the blue, green, and white variations. I got the check lands because I told you in last week's video I really like these in Commander. I like them in all play. They don't come into play tapped if you control the basic land of the type that it produces, and they're not that expensive, but they're really good. The change that may happen for the next video when I do finally get to it will be this. I've got all 3 of the pain lands. I'm not a big fan of the pain lands as much anymore. They're great because they come into play untapped, and then they can tap that colorless and not cause pain, but to use the colored, it causes pain. There's only 3 in here, so it shouldn't be too bad. I'm going to test it out and see. I've got the reprinted in Double Masters, the filter lands. I've got all 3 of them. They come into play untapped. They can tap to add a color list, and then they can also, you pay one of whatever color they produce. So this one is blue-green, and you can add either 2 green, a blue-green, or 2 blue, and I have all 3 of them. So I have that, Mystic Gate, and Wooded Bastion for mana fixing. I've got the actual fetch lands for all of the colors, the color combinations, Misty Rainforest, Flooded Strand, and Windswept Heath, so I can go get whatever I need. And then the last one is not a great one. It's a fetch land as well, but it's the one that comes into play untapped. You can tap that a colorless, and then you can pay 1, tap it, and sack it to go search for a basic Forest, Plains, or Island. So it's not the greatest, but for a deck that wants to go get all the lands it can, it works. The techie part of this deck will be the bounce lands, and there are 4 here. Instead of 3, there are 4. I've got Simic Growth Chamber, Azorius Chancery, and Selesnya Sanctuary, plus Gildas Commons. This is the colorless version of the bounce land. They come into play tapped. When they enter play, you have to return a land you control to your hand, and then they can tap to add 2 mana, one of each of the different kinds that are on this land. So this one's blue-green, this one's blue-white, and this one's white-green. The Commons is just an extra one because that's actually part of the combo for this deck. So I'm showing you in the land section, but it does happen to be part of the combos that I'll show you at the end of the video. As far as utility goes, I wanted to be able to cast things whenever I wanted to, so Alchemist Refuge lets you, it comes in the plan tapped, it taps to add 1 colorless, or you can pay a blue and a green and tap it, and you may cast non-land cards as though they had flash, so it makes all your stuff basically at instant speed. Really wanted that in this deck because I wanted to be able to play things when I wanted to play them. And the last utility card will be Reliquary Tower, because this deck, as I go over it, you will see, I have as many of these kinds of cards in here as possible because the amount of cards you can draw from this deck is really high. So, as many options as I could. Now, when I made this deck, Theros Beyond Death was just coming out, so I decided to just use the Pokemon-style lands. I will change that out to, now that the full art lands are something that is a normal thing in Magic, I will change them out for full art lands when I get a chance. Moving on to the ramp section of this deck, this is a hybrid style of ramping. I'm going to have mana rocks, I'm going to have spells that green uses to go fetch lands out of your library and put them into play, and then I'm going to use creatures because where the colors dictated it. So, we start off with a Soul Ring, it's kind of basic, an Arcane Signet, again, kind of basic. Thought Vessel, because I said not that long ago, about 30 seconds ago, I need to have no maximum hand size because of the amount of cards that this deck will draw, and you will see that. And Chromatic Lantern is one of my favorite mana-fixing mana rocks in the game because it allows all your lands to add 1 mana of any color, and then, of course, it taps for any color itself. And then we're in green, and I like green's land-fetching stuff, so we go with 3 Visits. That was added, actually, right before the video. Farseek, because it goes and gets anything but a forest, and that's a lot of your cards. A lot of your lands. Kadama's Reach lets you go get 2 lands, put 1 in your hand and 1 into play. It's not bad. And Cultivate does the same thing, only it's not an arcane spell. And this may change over time, the way that I do it, because the basic lands aren't very heavy in this deck. As far as creatures go, I went with Birds of Paradise, because they're just iconic and they do exactly what I want them to do. And Noble Hierarch, because it's 1 to cast, just like the birds. It doesn't fly, but it has Exalted, which could be useful, it might not be. It's only an 0/1, but it taps to add 1 of the 3 colors that you need. So, and that's my ramp section. As far as creatures go, there's quite a bit in here. They're all toolbox style. This is not a blink deck. It's not a flicker deck, however you want to call it, whichever one you use. This will be mimicking one, though, because of all the abilities to return stuff to your hand and then replay them again, because that's what Chulane does. So, obviously, it's going to start with Shrieking Drake, because that's probably the #1 card in all Chulane decks. It's useful, and it actually can be part of an infinite combo, but I will explain that later. Dreamstalker is essentially like the Shrieking Drake, only it can return a permanent you control instead of a creature, or itself, whichever way you want to do it. Mana War, it's kind of similar, but now you can return your opponent's stuff if you want to. Timber Sabertooth can return itself, and it's actually not a bad body for a 4 to cast. It's 4 to cast for a 4/3, and then you pay 2, you can return another creature you control to its owner's hand. And then if you do, Timber Sabertooth gains Indestructible. You can't return itself. I misspoke there. You can't return itself. You can return other things for 2, so it's pretty useful, especially in a deck that wants to keep casting stuff for Chulane triggers. Moloku, the Clouded Mirror. This is more for fun for me. It's 5 to cast. It's a 2/4 flyer. It doesn't really matter. It's the ability that it has that you pay 1 and return a land you control to its owner's hand to create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token. Now, it also has Flying the token, and this is to return lands to your hand if you don't get a bounce land. That's to make it so that you can keep doing it. So, not bad. Lotus Cobra for landfall triggers, because you will be putting a lot of lands into play. You might as well get some mana out of it, because, you know, anybody that can tap for mana that's not a land does not have haste in this deck. So, enough lands can enter the battlefield that you'll garner enough mana to be able to do things infinitely. So, for instance, Shrieking Drake will need 1 blue. So, if you can bounce lands and put them into play, there is a way to do it. I will show you that at the last section. You'll be able to create infinite mana to be able to continually do things. Scoot Swarm is for the trigger. It's another landfall for the trigger to create a token. This one's important because this also will end up being a infinite if you can do it right. And there are plenty of ways to do it in this deck. This deck has a lot of synergy and a lot of combos that can go off. Eternal Witness, because again, it mimics a blink or a flicker deck, if you will. You'll be able to get this back in your hand and cast it so you can get stuff back that you may have had blown up or what have you. Ashaya may be removed, and actually I have a deck that I'm going to build that's 4 colors finally, that this may go into. Ashaya is 5 to cast. It's a star creature where the power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control, and then non-token creatures you control are considered forests in addition to the other types. I originally had an idea here with the Scoot Swarms, however, because it's non-token creatures, it doesn't really do all that much. I had other plans with it as well. I didn't follow through with it, so this may end up going into a different deck, so we'll find out in the next video when I update the deck. Acidic Slime, good utility. It has an enter the battlefield or an ETB ability to destroy an artifact, enchantment, or a land, so you can keep returning it back to your hand, and then you can destroy somebody's land. You can actually wipe somebody's land out in 1 turn if you want to be that guy. Not saying you have to be, but it's good utility. White Main Line, it's a 2 to cast 2/2 flashing cat. So flash mean obviously you can cast it as if though it was an instant, or anytime you could play an instant, not as if though it was an instant. And when it enters play, you can return a creature you control to its owner's hand. So it can save somebody, or it can be a part of a combo. So Core Skyfisher, it's very similar, it just doesn't have flash. It's a 2 to cast 2/3 flyer that when it enters the battlefield, you return a permanent. Not just a creature, not just something specific, but anything that's a permanent back to your hand. A lot of bouncing here. Inspiring Overseer is absolutely banger in this deck. So it's 30 cast for a 2/1 flyer, and the flicker slash, blink effects really do well for this because you can keep casting Inspiring Overseer over and over again, and when it enters play, you gain a life and you draw a card. So you can draw your deck out, you can gain as much life as you want. It's pretty good. Same thing with Mage's Attendant. This was for utility as well. It's a 3 to cast 3/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 blue wizard token with each one of those wizard tokens has you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to counter a non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. Now you're actually being able to counter people's other win cons as long as they're not creature based by putting a whole bunch of Mage's Attendant tokens or the wizards that it creates into play. God Eternal Oketra, part of a infinite combo. Actually, most of the deck is partially, it could all be part of infinite combo. It's a 5 to cast 3/6 double striker that whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 4/4 black zombie warrior creature token with vigilance. It's a big creature that you can cast now, or you can create now. When it dies or is put in exile, you can also put it into your library third from the top, so it has resilience. Couldn't get that word out. Resilience. And yes, I will explain the infinite parts of it at the end of the video. Coiling Oracle, good utility, 2 to cast 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top card of your library, and if it's land, put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand, so it's not card draw, quasi-card draw. Knight of Autumn is another one that's utility. It's 3 to cast for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you can choose one of 3 things. So it's either put 2+1/+1 counters on it, which probably won't be what you choose. You can destroy an artifact or enchantment, or you can gain 4 life, so you can gain a lot of life, or start basically shotgunning things off the board. Reflector Mage, it's great utility. 3 to cast for a 2/3 that when it enters the battlefield, return target creature and opponent controls to its owner's hand, and that creature's owner can't cast spells with the same name as that creature until your next turn. So, this is a good thing to hit commanders with because you return the commanders to their hand. They have to choose one of 2 things. They can put it into their hand, or they can put it back into the command zone if they choose. I believe you can do that. I think that's one of the things you can choose when a commander is removed from the board. And they can't cast it until your next turn, meaning that they don't get it back for at least their next turn. You can do other things too, but that's one of the best ways to utilize this. Yashrin, Implacable Earth. 4 to cast 4/4. When it enters battlefield, search your library for a basic forest and a basic plains, and reveal those cards and put them into your hand. That's good because you can go get lands that you need. This has a lot of land fetching, which is why the non-spell use that this deck, I didn't put a lot of 3 visits or stuff like that in there because I have plenty of other ways to go get lands. That's good, but the important part here is that players also can't pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities. So if an ability has, you must sacrifice something to do something, you can't do it with him in play. Mystic Snake is for, I didn't put traditional counter magic in this deck because I wanted to have a theme here. I didn't want to just jam counter magic in, but I wanted to do it in a way that would fit the deck. Mystic Snake fits that bill. It's 4 to cast for a 2/2, and you may play it anytime you can play an instant, so you may play it as if though it has flash. And when it enters the battlefield, you counter a spell. I do have a foil one of these somewhere I'm probably going to change in later, but for now, this will work. I also backed it up with Frilled Mystic, so I had some redundancy. It's 2 blue and 2 green for a 3/2 that also has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, counter target spell. So, good utility stuff, and the counter magic fits the theme of the deck rather than just jamming it in. Tatiova, Benthic Druid, it's a 5 to cast 3/3, has a Landfall ability that whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may gain a life and draw a card. Again, more life gain, more card draw. I told you there's a lot of card draw in this deck. Last creature will be Karamitra, God of Harvest. 5 to cast, 6/7, legendary enchantment god that is indestructible. Devotion has to be 7 or higher for green or white for it to be a creature, otherwise it's just an enchantment. And if you need an explanation on how devotion works, just put a message in the comment section. I will answer any questions you have. And then whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a forest or a plains card and put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So plains and forest card means that you can go get dual lands or even that triome that I have in here. So it goes and fetches more than just basics. So like I said, a lot of ways to go get lands other than just spells like 3 visits. Moving on to the instants and sorceries of the deck. It's not a very big section, but what is there is good. We have tutors, so I'll start with that. Enlightened Tutor, so I can go get any artifact or enchantment that I would need for whatever situation is going on, put it on top of my library, and with the amount of card draw I have in this deck, I shouldn't have a problem being able to get it in my hand quickly. Idyllic Tutor goes and gets an enchantment and puts it in my hand. Aladomri's Call goes and gets a creature and puts it in my hand. And the last one is, the most important one, is Wargate. So it's one of each of the colors, so blue, white, and green, and then X, and I can search my library for a permanent card with converted mana cost, or mana value now, of X or less, and put it into play directly. This doesn't trigger Chulane's cast triggered ability, but it still puts something into play that you may be able to get back in your hand and cast anyway. So it's great utility and one of the best tutors in this deck. As far as defense goes, not a big section either. So I got some creature removal and some other stuff. So we start with Swords to Plowshares because it's the cheapest and probably one of the best ones to use for white. Path to Exile, same thing, one to cast and then exile as a creature. And of course they get a land and blah blah blah, who cares. Crows and Grips, so I can get rid of that artifact or enchantment that I need to get rid of that somebody might end the game, and it has split second so they can't do anything about it. Wrath of God for mass creature removal. My deck that I built here seems resilient enough that I can get everything off the field and cast Wrath and then get it back on the field. So I added that plus a Supreme Verdict because Supreme Verdict can't be countered. Alright. And then Flood of Tears may seem like an odd inclusion, but it's actually pretty good. So rather than Cyclonic Rift, I wanted to be able to return my stuff to my hand. So for 6, it returns all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. And if you, which is me, I return 4 or more non-token permanents that I control this way, I may put a permanent from my hand onto the battlefield. Most likely it'll be Chulane, so you can start your engine over again. And the final instant / sorcery is a sorcery called Finale of Revelation. One of the better finales. They're not all great. This one was actually pretty good. It's a 2 blue and X sorcery that you draw X cards. And if X was 10 or more, instead you shuffle your graveyard into your library, you draw X cards, and then you may untap up to 5 lands, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So that's another way that I gave myself no maximum hand size. And of course you have to exile it after you've played it. As far as the enchantments for this deck go, they're actually a mixed bag, so I'll just show you. Wizard class, because again, no maximum hand size. It is a class, and I love the classes. I really liked the idea of the classes. They all do something very important for the colors that they're in, and I want more of them. I just want as many classes as I can get. I'm probably going to put them in every deck. But for 1, you put into play, it gives you no maximum hand size. You can level it up for 3 to level 2, and you draw 2 cards, or you can level it up again to level 3 for 5 more. And whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter target creature you control. Probably won't play that much into this. It may, depending on what you're playing and how the game is turning. But for the most part, you're probably just going to draw the 2 cards and be done there. Rhystic Study, we all know Rhystic Study, the meme of do you pay the 1? Yes, this deck will need this as much as possible because it needs to draw as many cards as possible. Guardian Project, probably one of my favorite cards for Commander ever printed. It's a 4-cast enchantment that says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control, or a creature card in your graveyard, you draw a card. So in this deck, you're recasting 1 to cast things like Shrieking Drake over and over again. You'll be able to draw a lot of cards because there is no other card in the deck named Shrieking Drake. That's what I love about Guardian Project. It's why it's one of my favorite cards in Commander. It is green's way to draw cards, since that's the actual, the restriction of Commander is 1 only of non-basic lands, or of anything that's not a basic land. So Guardian Project is just basically cheating for green, at least in my opinion. Mana Breach is just for fun. It's 3 to cast, and whenever a player plays a spell, that player returns a land he or she controls to their hand. For this deck, that's a bonus, because you want to keep playing lands. For other people's decks, not so much. Kind of fun. Equilibrium, 3 to cast. Whenever you successfully cast a creature spell, you may pay 1 and return target creature to its owner's hand, and this is really actually better than it sounds. You can pay the 1 to return something of yours to your hand, or you can return something of your opponent to their hand. That includes their commander, as long as it doesn't have hexproof. Something I added right before I started the video is Meticulous Excavation. It's a 1 to cast enchantment. I want to play with this one a little bit. For each 3 you pay into it, you return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. If it for some reason had unearthed, you exile it instead and then return to your hand, and you can only activate this during your turn. I don't really care about any of the stuff after return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. I'm most likely going to be doing a lot of the stuff on my turn anyway, so I'm not worried about the last line, and then I don't have anything in here that has unearthed, so I just wanted to be able to continually return things to my hand. And Felidar Retreat is something I'm playing with as well. I actually play with this on Arena a lot. I like the card because its landfall ability is relevant for a lot of things. It's 4 to cast. When land enters, you can choose 1 of 2. You can either create a 2/2 white cat beast token, or you can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. So this deck will create a lot of tokens, kind of like Kakar will that I showed you last week. Being able to give them vigilance and +1/+1 counters can help with a nice go-wide themed win con. As far as the artifacts go that I have in here, I start off with Panharmonicon. This may come out, this may not. I'm going to play with it and see how it works. There are a lot of enter the battlefield triggers that happen with this deck, so I want to see if it makes a difference. So it's 4 to cast. When an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that trigger
that ability triggers an additional time. So when something enters the battlefield, if it hadn't entered the battlefield ability, it's now a permanent on the field that caused its own trigger, so it will trigger twice. So I want to see if it pans out the way I think it will. May come out. Crystal Shard for redundancy on being able to return things back to my hand, specifically creatures. So it's 3 to cast. You can pay either 3 or just 1 blue and tap it to return a creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1, and this can target your opponent's stuff. So you can possibly cause them to tap out, or you can just return something because they already are tapped out. Aetherflux Reservoir is a win con because of all the stuff that you should be able to do on your turn. For to cast, whenever you cast a spell, you gain a life for each spell that you've cast this turn, and then you can pay 50 life to have it deal 50 damage to target creature or player. So it's kind of a win con, and I'm playing with this one as well. It may come out. And the last artifact is a utility one to protect your commander. Chulane needs a lot of protection. Probably going to be targeted as soon as it hits the board, so Swiftfoot Boots gives it hexproof and haste. And the haste isn't all that important, but it's the hexproof. I don't want to give Chulane Shroud, which a lot of people would use Lightning Greaves for. I wanted hexproof on that, because there are some things I may want to be able to return it to my hand with a Mana War if need be, and I wanted to be able to target it. So that's the reason for Boots instead of Lightning Greaves. The Planeswalker section is actually a small section. There's only 2. There's actually a third, but I'll get into that. We start off with Vivien, Champion of the Wilds. She's 3 to cast, comes into play with 4 loyalty counters, has a static ability that I wanted. It says you may cast creature spells as if though they had flash. I wanted to be able to do stuff on my opponent's turn. Most of the stuff in here is either a sorcery or a permanent, and you can't do anything without casting it. It's just like the land I have in here that gives my stuff the ability to cast as if though it had flash. Her abilities, other than that, don't really matter, but I'll talk about them. You can add a loyalty counter, or the +1 side, and until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gains vigilance and reach, which isn't really all that important. I mean, we don't have a lot of flying in this deck, so it could be relevant for some of those 4/4 tokens, just to get some loyalty counters on Vivien for the other ability, which is a -2 ability. It's not an ultimate. She doesn't have an ultimate. She's only a rare planeswalker. And for -2, you can look at the top 3 cards of your library, exile one of them face, what is it, up or down? Exile one of those face down, and put the other 2 on the bottom of your library, and then you may cast that card as long as it's exiled. Now, you have to pay the mana cost for it. It does not say to cast it for free. And the other one is Tamiyo, Field Researcher. She's 1 of each of the colors, so blue, white, and green, and then 1 generic, so 4 total mana value. Comes into play with 4 loyalty counters. Her first uptick of 1 loyalty counter is to choose up to 2 target creatures until your next turn. Whenever either of those creatures deals damage, you draw a card, which is kind of eh. Her -2 is okay. It says up to 2 target non-land permanents. Tap up to 2 target non-land permanents. They don't untap during their controller's next untap step, so basically it stuns 2 permanents. Her ultimate is the only reason why I have it in here. So getting to the ultimate as fast as possible is what this deck wants to do. And for -7 ultimate, and you can ultimate her and then let her go. Once you get to 7, use it. Draw 3 cards, and then you get an emblem with, you may cast non-land cards from your hand without paying their mana costs. So this is part of Infinite as well. Imagine not having to pay for Shrieking Drake. Put them into play, bounce them, comes back. You'll be able to draw your whole deck, put any amount of lands you want into play. Her ultimate makes this deck really dangerous, so you're going to want to get the ultimate off as fast as possible. And the last part of the deck that I'll go over is combos and win cons. There are multiple combos that this deck can already do, but they're actually facilitated by a couple things. So I'll show you the one that I want to do for the deck. It starts with Walking Atlas, which is a 2 to cast 1/1 artifact construct creature that says you can tap it to put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. There are many other creatures that do that in green. There's, I think, 3 or 4 others that do that. However, I liked Walking Atlas because it didn't have color in its casting cost, and I only have 1 in the deck as far as what does this, and I may change that. Some of the other stuff may come out, and redundancy may be needed, and I may put more cards that do this. But it puts a land onto the battlefield for you, and it does not count as your land for the turn because an ability is doing it, not you playing it as part of the game's rules. You pair that with Retreat to Coral Helm, which is a 3 to cast enchantment that has a landfall trigger, and you get to choose one of the 2 options. When a land enters play, you may either tap or untap a creature, or you may scry 1. So being able to put a land into play with the Atlas, and then untapping it when the land comes into play, if you choose a bounce land, which I mentioned earlier in the video that is part of Infinite combos, you can keep putting a land into play and have infinite landfall triggers. Now, there's a Scoot Swarm in here. There's other things in here that create, the ability to have infinite tokens. So there's where Token Swarm comes in. That's one way to win. You can add Intruder Alarm to that, which says that no creatures untap during their untap steps, the controller's untap steps. And then whenever a creature comes into play, untap all creatures. So now you can sit there and play with it where when a land comes into play, a Scoot Swarm creates a token, so all things untap, and there's a lot of shenanigans that these 3 can do. I added an additional creature into that fold that can create a token because I wanted redundancy. So, Steward of Solidarity is a 2 to cast 2/2 that you can tap and exert it. and it creates a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. Now, Exerting means that it does not untap during its next controller's untap step, but when you add stuff in like Intruder Alarm, it doesn't matter. So it's, again, these two create infinite tokens. So lots of ways to go infinite in this deck. This is just part of it. The last thing I'll show you is win cons. All that card draw's got to go somewhere. So you know where this is going. If you don't, you should have. Thassa's Oracle. It's 2 to cast 1/3 that when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue. Put up to one of them into your, one of them on top of your library and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, if X was greater than or equal to the number of cards left in your library, you win the game. Yes, Thoracle sucks when you're playing against it. It's great when you're playing it. A lot of people are calling for its banning. If it happens, I have other ways to win. I have Labman, or Laboratory Maniac, 3 to cast 2/2, that says if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead of lose. And then Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, is the third Planeswalker that I mentioned a couple seconds ago. It's 3 blue and 1 to cast. It enters with 4 loyalty. It has a static ability of a win con, which is if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. And then its 2 loyalty up and minus abilities. Its 2 abilities are pretty relevant to this deck. You can uptick it for 1, and target player must mill 2 cards, and you draw a card, which is always nice, because more card draw is more gooder. And then its ultimate is to draw 7 cards, and then if your library has no cards in it, you win the game.
And there you have it, folks. My banned commander for the 32 deck challenge, Chulane, Teller of Tales. I'm not sure if you noticed, but one of the things I really liked about the build is that while Chulane helps the deck a lot, it's not completely reliant on it being in play. In fact, you could go entire games without casting her, and all the combos and synergies would still play out without her on the field. It would, however, be a hell of a lot easier with her. That's all I've got for you right now, but be sure to join me next week where I'll be going over yet another one of my personal decks that will check off a box for the 32 deck challenge. That one will be like my Nakusar deck in that it's actually a revamped version of one of my older multiplayer decks before Commander became the de facto format for casual multiplayer fun. It's one you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.